On December 18th, I did my very first live stream on Riverside with Angela Hollowell, and somehow we made it through and it wasn't a total dumpster fire, which totally feels like a win for me. Angela is a creator of Please Hustle Responsibly newsletter and the host of Honey and Hustle podcast. And on those, she spotlights North Carolina founders, creators, and nonprofit leaders with this level of care and specificity that I honestly admire. In this live stream, we talked about why we started our shows in the first place, what makes us keep going after we realized how much work it actually takes, and how podcasting can feel like this kind of strange mix of oral history, community building, and accidental therapy. We also got into the behind the scenes stuff, like how we prep for our interviews, how we create these safe spaces for guests to share their real stories, and really how our styles are completely different, but still deeply intentional. Angela shared how her newsletter has become kind of an ongoing conversation with her listeners. And we talked about the hosting learning curve, everything from pacing to building rapport before hitting record, to letting the conversation breathe without forcing it to follow a script. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I ended up saying the quiet part out loud, which is that podcasting has changed me. It's softened me. It's made me more forgiving of myself. And as weird as it is to admit, it might be the best thing I've ever done for myself. If you were there live, thank you. If you are watching or listening to the replay, I hope that something in it reminds you that there is more than one right way to tell a story, and you do not have to do it perfectly for it to matter.
I'll go ahead and introduce myself for the people that don't know me and let Matt introduce himself as well. Hey, everybody. My name is Angela Hollowell. I write the Please Hustle Responsibly newsletter, which is a companion newsletter to my podcast, Honey and Hustle, where I host interviews with North Carolina's founders, creators, and nonprofit leaders.
You should say that your newsletter, you're like on fire, because you started this year with like 600 and something subscribers. I read or listened, and now you're almost triple that.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that. That's a big feat, and I know that newsletters were super important for you to as a storyteller and as a information sharer. So good on you for making that happen. And 119 posts or newsletters. See, I listen. And that was earlier today. Anyway, hey everyone, I am Matt Gilhooly, and I am the creator of the Life Shift podcast and all the things that come along with it, because I can't stop creating. I also work a 9-to-5 in marketing for a mortgage technology company, and the show really started as a class assignment, and now here I am. I just recorded episode 238, and the show is all about helping share these pivotal moments that have changed people's lives from one second to the next. And so each conversation leads up to this, like, paints the before picture of someone, and then we talk about this life shift moment. And most of the time in the conversation, we're talking about how, as humans, we evolve and grow from these really hard moments or really great moments. And all my goal really is just that there are people out there that are going through circumstances and they feel really alone in those particular circumstances. And what I want is people to listen and feel like, oh, I'm not the only one going through this. This is something that I can move forward with, or I feel inspired to do this because so-and-so did it. And so it's just been this journey that I never could have predicted for myself. We'll talk a little bit about our whys, but man, the power of storytelling is just so beautiful. And how lucky are we to help other people share their stories in our own unique ways. So I'm just super jazzed that we have some of our friends here chatting with us. Hey, Frank. Just so everyone knows, this is my first time live streaming. So if I'm a dumpster fire, that's why. So shout out to me.
This is great. Thank you so much, Frank, for joining. I'm excited to see all of you guys in the chat. Matt touched on his why a little bit, but I wanted to kind of rewind and maybe talk about how we both got into hosting interview-based podcast, and maybe why we kept going after we saw the amount of work that it was. So I started Honey and Hustle as a pandemic podcast. I started in March of 2020. just as the world was shutting down. And I started it because I saw just the literal depth of change that happened when I moved from Alabama to North Carolina and the sheer amount of people that I was able to talk with and learn from who are full-time entrepreneurs. It's not to say that Alabama doesn't have full-time entrepreneurs, but they're a lot fewer and farther in between. And a lot of them are not attending networking events. They're working in their business, right? So I really wanted to have a platform where I could reach people with these stories because intrinsically, I just don't feel like it should matter where you live in terms of the access that you have to stories that are going to help you live the life that you want to live, grow the business that you want to have, and create the things that you want to make. And so that was kind of the premise for Honey and Hustle. The first season was all North Carolina entrepreneurs, terrible audio, great stories, great time. And,
We've all been there.
and glad I'm not alone in that. And I really just, was getting my legs under me. I had never really interviewed people at that scale. I had never produced a show like that before and really didn't have the audio gear and video gear necessary to do a long form interview style show like that. So it was a lot of learning. I think I kept going because even though, it was during the pandemic and I did have to shift to doing virtual interviews, I realized that I was really energized by these stories. It was a chance for me to learn. It was a chance for me to meet people I'd never met before that were going through some of the things that I was going through at the time. I went full time in entrepreneurship shortly after I started the show in May of 2020. And there was so much I had to learn, so much. And I was like, I know if I have these questions, somebody else is going to have these questions. And I want this to be a show where people, one, feel comfortable sharing the good and the bad of being your own boss and starting a business, but also share the things that maybe don't make it onto a magazine spread or a top 10, best businesses in North Carolina list. Let's talk about the times where you almost failed. Let's talk about the times that you had to make a difficult decision and you had to learn something new. Let's talk about your first hire. And I think that has been kind of the ongoing push for me to tell stories about North Carolina founders that don't always make North Carolina is the best state for business. Yeah, but who is making it the best state for business? Who are these business owners? And what is working for them? So thank you guys so much for joining.
What I think is beautiful about what you do, and it's such the antithesis of people that kind of start podcasts. I think a lot of people start podcasts, they want to be like the next Joe Rogan. I'm just going to get on the mic and I'm going to talk about everything. But yours is like so specifically local. And I love that you keep it that way. And it has a totally different draw. And it's so focused, which probably allows you to keep that why really strong and feels like a community more so than like you are broadcasting to the entire world, but you are focused on a subset of people. And I love that. I think about it a lot. Mine is more global. Like I will talk to anyone around the world because my specific show is about their own personal journeys, which has been a challenge in itself, but a really great challenge. So during the pandemic, as one does, I was super bored and I got a second master's degree. And in this version of this master's degree, I decided to take classes that scared me. And so podcasting was one. And I went into this class thinking, what are you going to talk about, Matt? Like, basically, I didn't know what I was going to talk about and what was going to be important. And little did I know it was going to be a life changing journey in itself, like a life shift, if you will. So the podcast started as 2 episode assignment. And by the end of that class, I had 9 episodes released into the world before even the final exam came about. And the show premise exists because when I was 8 years old, my dad had to sit me down to tell me that my mom had been killed in a motorcycle accident. And because of the time period, I didn't have the tools to grieve. My dad didn't have the tools to grieve. And so I pushed it down. And that younger version of me, all the way up into like nearly my 30s, wonder, do other people have these life-shifting moments in which from one second to the next, everything is different? And so when I started it, I called on friends that I knew so that I could, because I kind of knew their story and we wanted to unpack it. And I wanted to see if I could even ask them the questions and give myself permission to forget questions and not feel like I have to be prepared all the time, but rather Can I do the things I didn't do as a teenager or a young adult where I knew there were certain questions you're not supposed to ask, or you should only ask the questions that end with a yes or something like that. And so I leaned into the curiosity. I leaned into being comfortable asking a question that might get shut down, that might get, oh, I can't answer that question, or I disagree completely. And all of these were so great for me because it gave me such a growth journey. So anyway, I talk about lots of topics that are really hard, things that maybe people are sharing for the first time. And it's just such an honor that people trust me enough to have those conversations and get something out, because I do know there are people that are going through something very similar across the world. They're not, we think we're the only ones going through it and we're no one can understand, but there are people out there that have gone through similar things, both good and bad. And so that's just been my whole goal. But as you said, it's a lot of work. My first problem was that everyone is a guru. If you Google how do I podcast properly, and there's like 10 ways to be a great podcaster, and then the next one is 10 conflicting ways to be a great podcaster. And so that was really challenging for someone that just wanted to be good at it and wanted to kind of follow through. Where I got better at it was when I stopped listening to the gurus and really made my own journey. But my why is just so strong, knowing that 8-year-old version of me would have loved to hear some of these conversations, seeing adults that have kind of made it through something difficult or really inspiring or whatever it may be. I don't just talk sad things, but I gravitate towards that because that is my own journey. So that keeps me going. But it is, I mean, if anyone has not started their own podcast, I would say I spend about 10, 15 hours per episode, getting all the work from beginning where the pitch is coming in to recording to editing to marketing it at the end and sharing clips and all those things. And so, it's not for someone that has no time. It you have, if you want to do it right and you want to present these stories in the way that they should be presented, you have to have a strong why, and you have to kind of go into it knowing like this is all worth it. Because what if that one person that was just felt so alone hears someone's episode and is like, okay, I can move forward now. Like we win. Like that is my, it sounds like a silly goal, like one person hearing it, but if we can change that one person, maybe it's like that ripple effect. Maybe they can help someone else. So it's been a lot of work. I just recorded episode 238, which is for March. So I'm like super far ahead, which Angela might be a little bit jealous about, but I wouldn't trade this for the world. It's just such a pleasure and honor.
I want to address a couple of things. One, it feels like podcasting isn't talked about enough as like this beautiful merger of like oral history traditions with like archival work. Like the fact that every person that appears on your podcast all the way up to 238 in March is going to have a place on the internet where their story lives is like super beautiful. And they can always reference that in terms of maybe even looking back to see how far they've grown from that experience and just like sharing that so publicly. But also for other people to reference, it's like, has somebody gone through this? Oh, they have. Here's a story about it. I may never meet this person physically, but their story now lives with me, and that's awesome.
Well, and me too. Just as hosts, we get to talk to these people that we probably never would have bumped into in the world, and now we get to hold that. And it's a healing journey that I never knew I needed. I say it all the time on episodes because it's like you hear this story and you're like, oh, that resonates with me. Or, I had a conversation in which the guest shared something that validated something I thought was weird that I did as a teenager. And it like unleashed, like it let go of that shame and the thing. So you never know how someone's story is going to affect you, even as a host or a guest. I mean, Frank is asking, have you been a guest on a show? Angela, you've been
I've
a
been a guest
guest.
on a couple shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think as someone who maybe goes on shows to talk about less personal things and more like business oriented things, my experience might be a little bit different. Have people ask me personal questions still? Yes. And I think for me, some of it was like understanding what parts of my story like I was comfortable telling and how to tell them in a way that's like beneficial. Like I don't necessarily cut myself off in an effort to be super concise and like you know, talking point driven or anything like that. But I do try to like not start from like the beginning of my entire being when asked a question. so
I think you're calling me out.
so it was just like an effort in like, okay, how do I share my story? What does that sound like actually? What parts of my story are resonating with people? What parts of my story do I shy away from because they make me uncomfortable to admit that maybe I'm not perfect or I did something wrong or I feel like I made a mistake or I was going through a rough time. But often now I'm way more comfortable getting to a place of just like being honest. Like I love that I'm seeing all these posts on the internet that are like, next time somebody asks me how I'm doing, I'm going to be honest about it. And Matt did ask me how I was doing today, and I was completely honest about it. and learning to apply that with being a podcast guest as well. Like I don't have to act like I'm outside of my entire life once I enter this show. Like this is a part of my life, and that's okay too.
I agree. I've been on, I think, probably like 30 plus shows now, and I think this kind of leads into the idea of the power of storytelling as a guest on another show. I try not to show up as a podcaster because I don't want to think that way. Everyone has their own way of podcasting, so that's probably the hardest part for me is to show up and release some of that control because I'm not in control and I'm usually in control of that. But what I found is that my story continues to evolve because if we're lucky enough as humans, we have the ability to reflect on what's happened in an honest way in our lives and see how certain things served us and certain things maybe pushed us away from our true being and whatever happened. So if I go back and listen to like the first podcast I was on, the way I told the story about losing my mother and the struggle of grief for 20 plus years, and then how that really informed how I approached losing my grandmother and the benefits that came from the really crappy journey. It's really kind of opened my eyes to like different nuances in the story and made me think about like, oh, wow. Like one thing that happened for me that I realized in this podcasting journey, I don't remember exactly where, but at some point with all these conversations, I was talking on another show and I realized that so many of the decisions that I made growing up were out of fear of abandonment. And I had never really pieced that together before sharing my story so much because I think when you talk to your parents about your story or you talk to your friends about your story, normally they will interject with how they saw it or their opinion of the particular moment. Whereas when you're on another show, you have this freedom to kind of share how you saw it because that is your truth, right? And so it's such a pleasure to be a part of that. And like you said earlier, just put that story out there into the world. But I bet you if you listen to the first couple appearances that I had on podcasts to now when I do it, you'll see a difference. You'll see there's more nuance in my story and more understanding of my story. So, I mean, bring it on. I love being a guest. But I love holding this space. As Mars, you came on the show and you I mean, you just noted in here that you spoke about being non-binary like out loud, and I feel like there was power in that because I remember around the time you kind of shared the video on LinkedIn or you shared a clip of it on LinkedIn and I think it gave you a little bit more power. I might be putting words in your mouth, but I hope not. But it's just important to listen, right? And that's all it is. If you're listening, then you're not, well, I used to listen for the silences to come up with something to say. And now I'm listening so that I can react or ask a question or go deeper or go down the tangent that they wanted to go down because that's way more important than sounding smart with my next question or sounding like, oh, I did all my research when that's not how we as humans connect. I'm not here to inflate your ego. I'm here to like figure out who you are and what you bring to the world and what can we help other people with.
Two things here that I wanted to note that I'm not sure where we are in our little schedule, but I wanted to talk about Mars's question about how we create safe spaces for our guests to share vulnerable stories. And you touched on it with the listening, but I also think we wanted to talk about how we prep for an interview because I think that's changed for both of us throughout our journey. When I first started, I, again, had never hosted anything before, was completely new to hosting, and did some research, but didn't want people to feel like I had a list of questions and that was all we were going to talk about. And once they got done answering a question, I was going to move on to the next one without asking deeper questions. So I would come to the interview with just myself, like nothing written down or prepared. And I would be listening so intently. And as they were talking, I would have a question for them. But then by the time they got to the end of an answer, I'd be like, crap, what's my question? So there were times where I would like visibly just like forget my question. Not a good practice for an interview host. Doesn't help the flow of the conversation. Because sometimes like having like just listening to like ask the next question just really takes you out of the conversation itself, which again, as Matt said, like that's not how we connect. That's not how we would naturally engage with a person. We would just have a conversation with them. And so it took me a minute to really kind of get to a place where I could come with research, come prepared with certain questions, but also be open to the flow of the conversation and be okay with leaving a question behind if it didn't fit the flow of the conversation. I think Matt is probably a little bit different because he started it for a class. So he was like, oh, I have these things I need to talk about. And then he was like, oh, forget that.
I'm the opposite. And I think it just depends. Your show has a different angle. There are certain things that you want to get out of your guests. For
Yeah.
me, I don't have, like, there's not a certain thing that I want to get out of my guests besides centering the conversation around a life shift moment, a pivotal moment that we feel really changed us the most. So, yes, I started with questions because that was required. So, my first two episodes have questions. And then what I found is I wasn't listening. I was just listening for, the next silence to go to my next question. And the biggest gift I gave myself was to allow myself to forget the question, which was the opposite for you, where you were like, oh crap, I forgot my question. So that's good for me because we all get trapped in that. And if the conversation takes itself in a different place for my show, I want to go there because I think that's where the universe wanted to take that conversation and where the guest is feeling the most comfortable and it kind of goes in that space. And, weaving in how to create a safe space, a lot of it comes from being willing as a host to be vulnerable, to be wrong, to be flawed. In my 40s now, I've learned that I show up much better if I know all the flaws and I can share those willingly and not worry that other people are like, oh, you're not perfect or whatever. And so I do lead into these conversations with just being vulnerable. Like someone's talking about some grand thing and I'm like, I just don't understand. Like, this is how I broke things when I was, this particular age. And I think that just kind of opens the door that we are having a conversation. We are trying to get to know each other as humans. And growing up, at least for me in society, I was taught that we weren't supposed to talk about certain things. We were only supposed to talk about the good things. We were brushing everything else under the rug. And I think a lot of people were taught that. And so I want to kind of break that as much as I can to make it safe to be wrong. Because what is wrong? It's just a different way of doing something. It's as it relates to living as a human being. So, I just try to come in with full honesty. Anyway, that was to answer your question, Mars, of like trying to just be there and go and be willing to go wherever it goes. But as far as prep goes, you can tell everyone, it's okay. I don't do any prep. So I have pitches that I go through. I go back and forth, kind of like making sure that we have this life shift moment. Person fills out the form. The form has that life shift moment on it. So we're aware that there is one, and we're going to talk about that. And I look at that about 5 minutes before every recording because I want to come in without a plan. I want to come in with my curiosity, my life experience, and being willing to ask those questions from my perspective and just let that guest story come out the way that it needs to come out. So I'm like legit the opposite of you, Angela, of like prep work. And I always apologize to the guests ahead of time. I'm like, I don't do the research because I don't want to know. I'm very type A. If I knew, that's all we're going to talk about.
That is hilarious. But you do have a form, though. I think that's still a form of research, even if you don't use it extensively. Like, I think it's something. Um, I think in terms of like prep, I can be a little ridiculous. I do sometimes watch previous episodes, like interviews that they've done. And I do read things that they've written. Like if they have any kind of media, I try to go out there and see what it is. Some business owners don't, some do. Like Ninth Wonder, who's been documented way more than most people probably, and has a very public profile, even though he is kind of incognito here in North Carolina. But someone like, yeah, Corplex, had to put that in there, Mars. But I also think in terms of prep, one thing that I'm noticing is that there's no amount of prep that can prepare you for like the things that are going to come out of you during an interview. Like I think you talked about showing up honestly and willing to be vulnerable, willing to be wrong, willing to ask curious questions. I think for me, having the newsletter has almost given my podcast like this comment section, and people will share more with me. They'll respond to my newsletter and say, "Hey, I listened to your last episode and blah, blah, blah." What has come out of that is almost this two-way conversation where now I'm not just posting an episode and sharing it to social media and hoping someone tells me how I'm doing or leaves me a review. Now it's like I'm posting an episode and I'm sharing it in my newsletter, and people are like, "Oh, she just emailed me. I listened to that. Let me respond to her and tell her what I thought." And a lot of the feedback that I'm getting is that people are really drawn to the episodes that like you and I did, that I did with Michelle, that I do with other people who I'm interviewing, that they feel like they got to know me more, not necessarily the other guests. And so while having a guest is great, what they care about is learning about me. Because I guess now after 5, almost 6 years, people are like, oh, I'm listening to this show for the host. Everybody else is extra. And that's great. But I like the host and I want to learn more about the host and why she feels like this is a good person to have on the show, what parts of her connect with this person, and what parts of her maybe are a reflection of maybe some things I'm going through right now. And that has been just like a very interesting trajectory of the show and trajectory of like my experience as a host now. Even some episodes where I was like, oh, I shared a lot about myself. And that, as I'm like going through and editing to Frank's question, I do edit my interviews. As I'm going through, I'm like, oh, wow, I shared a lot. I don't know if I overshared there, but at least I structured my oversharing. So within the conversation, so it's fine.
Did not overshare.
No, but I think to your point, like, that's how I would normally engage in a conversation. I wouldn't say, oh, this person just shared something vulnerable with me. Let me move on to the next question. I would say, you know what? Actually, I've been through a similar situation and this is how I felt about it. So, you know what I mean? And you would keep going down that rabbit hole to where you felt satisfied. But ultimately, creating a safe space, I would love to believe that it's this mythical, magical thing. But the reality is, I think when I'm listening to other hosts and when I'm studying other hosts that I wanted to emulate, like Zane Lowe and people like that, they do the same thing. They open up about being a fan of something. They open up about a childhood experience that connects them to that same feeling that their guest just expressed. They open up about their nerdy tendencies and the things that they enjoy that bring them together. And I think that is kind of a hallmark of Honey and Hustle a little bit because, again, it does have a little more structure because I am trying to get certain things out of people. But what brings me and intrigues me about these guests is their interest in business, and I have a shared interest in that. And I think the more I can share that from different perspectives and different angles, the better it's going to be and the more comfortable people will be. And I know that there are some guests that do research the show before they come on. So it's also like
That's nice.
hosting is also like an audition of like what other people are going to expect when they're a guest. It's like, what kind of host is she? Does she feel stiff? Does she feel like someone I can talk to? Does she feel like someone I can be comfortable with? And I want people to feel that way. So
Yeah, I think that that just shows like the way you describe what you do, the way I describe what I do is that like we can create our own journeys as podcasters. There's not one right way to do it. And I think sometimes people think that and it's not true. I mean, Frank reviews like independent podcasts all the time and all of them are so different and he's able to see that like all these people are leaning into their whys and really celebrating that and bringing their own uniqueness to the world instead of copying someone else. And I think there's a nice freedom in that. And it's like, I don't know about you, but the podcasting industry has been the most collaborative group of people that I've ever encountered, you don't feel competitive at all. Like everyone, like, hey, I don't know how to do this. Anyone have any ideas? And like 20 people are chiming in saying, here's what I did. I don't know if it'll work for you, but here's what I did. And I think it's so beautiful. Or like, we're not gatekeeping anything because we all know what it's like and how it feels when you get it right, when it feels right. So I love that just us talking shows that our shows are wildly different in the way we handle them, but they're still, out there every time we publish, and it's the way we do it. I see Frank's question. I edit, but I've relinquished some control there. So I finally have outsourced some help on editing my podcast because I do work a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So in order to keep up with these important stories, I had to let go of some control, and it's been nice to have my weekends back. So that's what that's what I do these days. But I did do the first 215 episodes or so myself. So yeah, kind of have to, right?
Yeah, I will say I have outsourced editing before, but as of right now, it's back in my hands. I think part of it is that I wanted to craft a new way forward with the show. I didn't want it to feel like every other show. Like the first real set of editors that I had on retainer, they like gave me a show that I felt like was everybody else's show, and they gave me clips from the show, and I was like, okay, well, I can keep doing that, or I can create a video podcast on my own terms. Uh, as evidenced by Frank. So he said he listened to two of my shows, one with Michelle Thames about threads, that was about 16 minutes, and another with Michelle Jackson, that was nearly 2 hours. Both shows, but wildly disparate in length. Yes, so I can address that. One, when I talked to Michelle Thames, she's in Chicago. That is actually her preferred style. When I asked her about being on my show, she's like, hey, I noticed your show is roughly around 30 to 45 minutes on average. I don't do that. I only want to be on a shorter show. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And when I got her on the show, it was like very quick answers, very concise answers. And there's maybe even an argument that maybe I shouldn't have published that because it's not in line with some of my other ones. But I've done some solo episodes that are shorter, that are like less than 20 minutes. So I felt comfortable with it. I guess in that sense, when I edited it, I was just more concerned about clarity and if we stayed on topic, which I feel like we did. With Michelle, me and Michelle know each other extremely well. We go live on Substack every week. Not doing it this week. We're taking a holiday break, so we'll be back after MLK Day. But, me and Michelle, we know each other really, really well. And we just went down all these different rabbit holes and personal stories and personal experiences, and we knew how to pull that out of each other because that's how we would naturally talk. It was actually over 2 hours when we recorded it, and I edited it down to, I think, like an hour 45, which is still fairly long, but that's what I felt was a good representation of our conversation. And yeah, I think our episode was over an hour, the one we did together.
Oh, well, you can't shut me up. So that's the thing. I like, for when you said that, and if a guest told me like they only do 15, I would say then for me I would not do that because I can't
Yeah.
really get as deep as I need to or want to in those episodes
Yeah.
that people want to dictate how they go. So, but
Yeah, and
good on
again,
you.
that was, an interesting one, and I had I known that before we hit record, I maybe wouldn't have said yes, but she did actually ask me. I met her at, Podcast Movement Evolutions in Chicago, and that's where she lives, and, so, yeah, so she had asked me, and I had done some research on her show, and I knew her show was shorter, but if you're coming on my show, I don't feel that I have to be constrained by a shorter time frame.
I agree.
Um but again, I mean, it's one of those shows where it's like, if Frank listens to this, does he feel like he really got to know me as a host in 16 minutes? Is that a good representation of the show? Maybe not our best one. Do I still feel like it was good? Yes, I think it was fine. And I think sometimes what I've come to the conclusion about is that as long as I feel like something is valuable, I'll put it out there. I can always unpublish it later, but I felt good about the value that it brought and the topic I really wanted to talk about, threads. I think that's a really interesting space right now. So
Be curious to like kind of venture into, do you pitch your guests? Like, do you reach out and find guests? Because my process has been wild and crazy and really kind of irresponsible of me, but also like fantastic problem to have. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you want me to talk or you.
I can go into it since we are talking about this because they actually came onto the show in two different ways. So Michelle actually, well, no, actually, I think they came on similar way, but it's an unusual way for people to come on my show, actually. So both of the Michelles asked me about being on my show. Typically, my hit rate for saying yes to someone asking me to be on my show is extremely low. The only reason I said yes to them, or 80% of the reason, was because I knew them personally. Like I had met both of them in person and obviously know Michelle Jackson very well. And because I was interested in the topics that they proposed. That was maybe 20%. In terms of me saying yes to a pitch, I almost don't even read half of them. They're so irrelevant for my show and so wildly unspecific to what it is I want to focus on. So almost 100% of my episodes have been me reaching out and saying, "Hey, I saw your story. I'd like to go deeper in an interview on my show." And even going into 2026 now, have some episodes that are going to be more ecosystem driven. So it's going to be multiple interviews that I'm weaving into a narrative about a town or a city, or an area in North Carolina, or a moment in history. So it's going to be almost like investigative journalism meets like creator interest. I don't
Yeah,
know on the
I
show,
love
but
that.
on North Carolina's like still on the premise of the show. So highly curated interviews, I would say, on my end.
Yeah, for me, I haven't sought out a guest since October of 22. So I get all the ones you get. I get a lot of copy paste pitches, which drive me bonkers and feel disrespectful because I am so close to my content and it feels so personal. Even if I'm holding, someone else's story, it still feels very personal and curated. And so it hurts a little when they're like, I love your show. This is how someone can teach your audience about dancing. And you're like, you don't love my show. You've never heard my show. And so, but it seems to be the norm from a lot of agencies that are pitching. But I do respond to every pitch that I get, even the terrible ones, because I think they should know that it doesn't align and that based on what they said, it doesn't fit the mold. And I found a lot of responses back saying, you know what, you're right. Thank you for pointing that out. And so I'm trying to create a kinder ecosystem in which, people can understand what it's like on this side because so many, like yourself, you said you don't read half of them and you just trash them. So that's why they just keep doing it. They just like blanket the world with their particular pitches. But fortunately, in between all of those, I get some really deep, important pitches from people that have listened to the show or they know someone that was on the show. And they're just like in an email dumping something really personal and hard for them. I've had people on the show talk about stuff they've never shared with people other than like their spouse or their parents. And they now want to share it with the world. And who am I to say no to that, right? Because that's a story that needs to be shared. But it's gotten me into a situation in which I'm fully booked with two recordings every single week through like early March. So that's just recordings. And if I just recorded an episode that's coming out in March, I really have like episodes to take me into probably the fall, right? And so that sounds good on paper. It sounds good. For me, it hurts because I'm holding these important stories and there could be someone out there that needs to hear it. So there's a big responsibility that I feel in which people that listen to my show have seen multiple episodes come out for every week for months on end so that I can get these stories out there because that part is more important to me than being a podcaster that is always consistent with one a week or whatever that may be. And so it's like it's great because there are so many stories out there and everyone has a story. Not everyone's ready to tell their story, and I've recorded a few of those and a few that have never seen the light of day because of that. But overall, I'm blessed that I don't have to go out and seek because it's a little hard. Like I can't just think celebrity, right? Like I don't know if they've had a life shift moment that they're ready to talk about. So how do I pitch them? So it is good that I have these inbound things, but it can get a little overwhelming because how do you say no to someone's personal story?
Yeah. I mean, again, as someone who doesn't really read a lot of pitches, they can share whatever they want. Most of them are just so irrelevant. And part of that is, I will say it's easy for me to weed out as well because in the description of the show, I say that I only interview North Carolina entrepreneurs. And almost everybody that pitches me is not from North Carolina. So it's just like, why are you in my
Yeah,
inbox
that's
trying to
fair.
pitch me something about like how to grow a print on demand? I don't care. My audience doesn't care. Please stop. Okay. Like,
Fair.
um,
Yeah,
there's
it's
that.
I think, they're just doing their job too, and that's kind of why I feel the need to respond to let them know it just there's no connection to the show or, I wish them the best, but it's worked out well actually because sometimes they'll come back and say, "Oh, you know what, you're right, and I just thought of someone else because of what you said as it relates to this, and here's how I think they really fit, but this person didn't." And so I'm trying to find the time to do that, but I try to respond to nearly all of them that come through. It's
This is
wild
something
and
we
crazy.
haven't talked about in terms of being podcast, like from the perspective of a podcast guest, right? So there's an element of storytelling that we are being conduits for, right? By providing a platform and creating a safe space for people to tell certain stories. But there's also this element of like, well, for people who want to be podcast guests, which includes ourselves, we've been guests on other shows. How do we successfully identify the parts of our story that would be relevant for a show? For us, it probably feels innate. But for a lot of the people that are pitching us and giving us these cookie cutter, look at this PDF that we put together that we sent to 60 people who just so happen to be, in this category on Spotify who have released an episode in the last 90 days, probably is my assumption of how they're filtering and finding my show. And, ultimately, it feels innate for us to be like, okay, I see this show on writing and I'm a writer. Of course, I want to be on the show. Let me tell them about my newsletter. And I would love to come on and talk about my, approach to writing a newsletter and approach to writing narrative film series and, approach to writing anything. That feels like a good fit, right? That feels innate. That feels aligned with their show. But we get so many people who just don't do that. And I think part of it is, you know, a lack of understanding of the filtering process that we have to go through and the attachment that we have to our audience as well. Like you said, like I care deeply about who I put in front of my audience. And even sometimes when I have someone like Michelle Thames, who is a great person, honestly, she's super nice, but maybe is on the shorter end of things. And I kind of have to like really massage the episode to get it to a place where I feel comfortable. Even that to me feels like work and feels like care. And I've only had, aside from season one, because the audio is terrible, I think I've only had one other interview that I've said, hey, I can't air this. And that's really hard for me to do. Um, so yeah, I,
Yeah. Because
yeah.
it feels like, for me, it feels like I'm discounting their story, and it was a really hard decision. And I'm glad I made it, and it didn't fit. It didn't feel right. We didn't get to a place that was like a life shift moment. We got to generalities, and that's an instance in which someone believes they're ready to tell their story, but then they're not when you get into the nitty gritty, and that's okay too. But I also have to be true to what I want to, you know, project out there and put out there in the world. But then you have the ones like I mentioned. I had a guest. I was going to just kind of go into that power of storytelling again. I had a guest that came on to the show for the first time, was sharing her infertility journey through, trying to conceive, and she had told, I mean, just her husband and her parents knew. She hadn't told anyone because there's some kind of shame that people bring along with that they shouldn't, that the public kind of feels. And so she felt really empowered after she told that, and people reached out to her and said, "Oh, I went through the same thing. I know exactly how you're feeling," and all this stuff. And I'm saying this because there is such power in that. And because she told her story in that way and we had that conversation, she went to her HR department and she advocated that they include a stipend to people that are trying to start families, whether that's IVF, fertility treatments, or adoption. And so now everyone at her company has the opportunity to get this stipend to start their family in whatever way they need help doing so. And I think that's beautiful because sometimes we hold on to our stories because we think, oh, well, no one cares, or I should be ashamed, or, it's mine to deal with. I'm the only one that's gone through it. But saying it out loud can create such power in ourselves. And so I always encourage people to just share their story with whoever or write it or, something, just get it out of your head because I think it can empower you. Because for me, all the things in my head are far scarier in my head than when I say them out loud or write them down. So I really just, I think I knew the power of storytelling before. Like I understood it logically, like, oh, there's a lot of power in that. But seeing it happen, it's pretty cool. Or when someone's like, I never really thought about that part of my life in that way. You see like the light bulbs and the things. Now we've uncovered a layer for them that maybe is going to change how they see that particular moment. Maybe they thought it was bad and now somehow they're like, "Oh, that makes sense now why I did that." So I think there's just we're lucky. We're lucky that we get to have conversations with people and that they are willing to go down roads that maybe they don't always share in other places. So I'm just so honored.
Yeah. Really quick here. We've been going for 46 minutes, and I just want to
Wow.
say thank you to everybody's been like hanging out with us. This has been like so much fun. And Frank is back at it with another question. What was
Frank's
the
the
most
best.
difficult part of the hosting learning curve? For example, some hosts talk too fast, too slow. I think for me, because I started with, and this, if it's okay if answer this first, but I think for me, because I started with a video podcast and still am going to bring that back to YouTube. For one, it was just showing up on camera and getting used to seeing myself on camera, getting used to being like perceived as like, oh, can see me and like watch me and see my mannerisms and let me not try to look too bored. Let me try to look engaged. And then when I get nervous, I talk fast. So I did have to go through that. And my mom who is like my biggest advocate. She will text me. Like she watched, and that was like my biggest saving grace. I think when I first started my YouTube and podcast journey was that my mom would watch everything and she would text me feedback. She'd be like, the music is too loud on the edit. You're talking too fast. You need to slow down. That person has a voice like a freight train. Why did you get them on the show? Like just all these different things.
Was that my episode?
No, it was ages ago when I first started. And I think, like having that was helpful because like sometimes you're talking too fast, you're nervous, but then like to hear it come across, it's like also like, okay, I need to like slow down. I need to take a breath and like I need to find my way as a host and how I show up on camera. And I think that has gotten so much better as the years have gone on, but it's through just like a lot of practice of me just saying like, yes, the camera's here, but like even without the cameras, this is how people see me when I'm walking on the street, and I never feel self-conscious about it then. Like, why should I feel self-conscious
Mm-hmm.
about it now? So having that talk with myself, having my little uniform that I wear, so like me and Matt are both wearing like our own merch. That makes me feel like, okay, I'm showing up for work today. I'm showing up for the camera today, like, and in a way that feels good and feels right to me. And then also I think just through having the time where I'm setting up for a video podcast and having the time before we hit record on Riverside, if I'm hosting someone virtually, is having and using that space to like build rapport, like not thinking I need to immediately go into recording after I say hello. It's like, no, we can talk and I can ask them how they're doing. I can see if they need water. I can, you know, see how they're feeling today, test the audio with them, kind of give them expectations for what they can expect during the interview and really just like help them feel at ease and also give myself time to work on my cadence, work on my pace,
And don't hit
give
the
them,
table
yes, like,
like you just
um,
were.
and just really set the tone for how things are going to go and really work on welcoming them into a space. And that's even something that I've taken into the newsletter. It's like, okay, what am I doing with my welcome message or welcome sequence? Am I making people feel welcomed into the newsletter community? Or am I just saying, hey, thanks for subscribing? Thank you for being bombarded with my interview. Like, like that's also not welcoming. That also doesn't make people feel like they want to stay after, one or two issues. So creating that culture of like in space for like, this is what to expect. You're welcome here. This is a safe space. This is how this is going to go. If you mess up, that's fine. I can edit it out. You know, if there's anything you feel uncomfortable with after you've thought about it, after we record, just let me know. It's no problem. Um, all those types of things I think are super important.
For me, a lot of it was I didn't know what I would sound like in these interviews or these conversations that I'm having, and having to edit myself gave me the ability to learn how to speak better and to avoid a lot of filler words and just give some space and slow down. I think that it's much easier to edit. And so I think the more you edit yourself, the more you realize, okay, I can avoid doing some of those things. I can take a breath there instead of kind of filling space with a noise. I can make a mistake and then pause and then say it the correct way and also not sound like a robot, which I think is important. And Frank, that is a challenge. The question Frank just asked, don't let the guest blurt out the entire story all at once without taking a breath. How do you two do that? I That is a challenge because I think when someone is nervous to share their very personal story, I find that they talk more without pausing. So the only thing I do now is if I can tell they're nervous when they come on, we have the rapport kind of building, like you said, Angela, but I say, okay, I need you to pause every once in a while because I would like to, interject with stuff. And sometimes I just have to interrupt. And I try to do that carefully and kindly and kind of re-navigate the direction that we're going because it's really easy for someone that hasn't told their story before to get caught in the weeds about things that are not making the story go on. So it's hard though, because at the same time, you're like, this is their story. I don't want to assume that it should go in a different direction. So that one's a hard one. And I just kind of play in the moment, I think, for that. How about you?
I think, as someone who preps a lot for interviews, like I always want people to feel like I'm setting them up for success. Like I don't want people to feel like I'm setting them up for a gotcha moment or I'm setting them up to be uncomfortable. And I think one thing that I've learned, because again, especially after the guest that I had to say like, hey, I can't air this episode, I learned that sometimes breaking up a story is really helpful. One of the pieces of advice I got from someone as I was like prepping for a presentation was like 10 and 2 chunk and chew. So like have kind of a maybe wide angle question that we start with, where sometimes like I don't say, oh, introduce yourself. I'll say, hey, this is who this is. And I want to start with this part of your story, right? And allow them to kind of fill in the gaps for me. And then I'll kind of follow their thread through that. So give them a big chunk and then let's let people chew on it. Well, why did that happen? Why did you decide to do this business? Why did you decide to move? Why did you decide to quit your job? When did you know this was the right time to go full on in your business? So give people kind of a good section of like, here's a bigger part of it. Let's break that down into smaller parts. Okay, here's another big part. Let's break that down into smaller parts. And for that to feel as natural as possible, to feel like I'm guiding them through the experience of sharing their story and guiding them through um, the things that they've accomplished, right? Because I think for me, sometimes when I'm interviewing people, especially North Carolina entrepreneurs who, are not ninth wonder, they're not people who have been interviewed a lot before, they probably have a hard time bragging on themselves. And I want people to brag on themselves. I don't want people to feel like I'm only here to get the nasty parts of business. I want to get the good parts as well.
But I also want the nasty parts.
How do we create space for both,
Yeah. Yeah. It is a challenge. And for me, sometimes it's like, Frank, sometimes they don't blurt any of the story out. Like they immediately jump to like, I'll ask them to paint the picture of their life leading up to the life shift moment. And they're like, one sentence and then this happened. And then you're like, oh wow, you did not give me. So then we have to like backtrack and kind of figure it out how we can really showcase that before version. But I think for me, your show is more structured than mine. I have three parts that I see my show in is the before, the moment, and the after. And so I try to navigate that as best as I can. But sometimes it's like the before is itty bitty and the after is really long. And then sometimes the before is really long. And then we only have a little bit of time to dissect the after. But I don't fault myself for that because I think, in my opinion, if they feel comfortable, if they feel their story came out in the way that they wanted to, as long as they didn't hit the bullet points that I hate when people try to come in with their bullet points, I feel like we did a good job, and that was how the story was meant to be told that particular day. So there's a lot of freedom in that I've given myself, which is weird for a very much perfectionist type of person. It's weird that I've let go of a lot of those things because of this show. So it's like changed me in a way that is way more empathetic, way more forgiving of myself for a lot of things. So it's just been podcasting has been the best thing that I've ever done for me. And I mean, I'm glad that it resonates with other people, but it's the best thing that I've ever done for myself.
Oh man. Oh man. Are we getting sappy here?
Yeah.
We are at 56. I just want to say thank you to Frank. Frank says the both of you are superb at what you do. I listen to celebrity interview shows for my work where the celebrity can't hold a candle to your skills. And I also want to say that's probably because they haven't hosted before, and that's fine. I want to believe that because of all the money that goes into celebrity interview shows, that they will get better over time.
I wish all that money came into our shows.
That
That'd
would be
be
great.
awesome. Yeah. No, I agree. And Frank is thank you for being so kind to the independent podcast people that are part of all these shows, the hosts, the production teams, all the networks that exist because just being seen by people is really beautiful and you've done such a great job connecting people too. Like I've met so many people through the podcasts that you review and it's just been thank you for what you do. I don't know what else to say besides thank you. It's very meaningful.
Yeah, a lot of love going around. I love it. Oh man, thank you both. I'll be writing an article about this hour. Thank you both for what you do.
I
Oh
have a
man.
new artwork, Frank, so I'll send you the new artwork because I like to change my artwork. I am on version 9 of my artwork.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't changed mine in forever.
But anyway, we don't want to keep everyone. We understand that you dedicated your hour to us, and we're just so grateful. We didn't know, well, I mean, we kind of knew what we were going to come in and talk about, but we didn't know how this was going to go. And I love these questions and being able to talk about podcasting, in this way and seeing how different we are in the way that we approach our podcasts. It's just fantastic. So thank you guys. Did
Thank
I
you.
end it too soon?
No, I think it's fun. I think it's fun. Thank you.
Happy holidays to everyone and Merry Christmas and all the things that we celebrate. I hope you get some time with your family and enjoy that. And we'll still be podcasting over here. So make sure you're following us.
I'll
All
see you
right,
guys.
guys. Have a great one. Take care.